Forget everything you think you know about routine freedom of navigation operations in the Taiwan Strait. What happened in those waters 8 hours after Chinese forces established their exclusion perimeter represents the most dangerous moment in U.S. China military relations since the 1996 Taiwan Strait crisis. And if you believe the Pentagon's carefully worded press releases about coordinated transits and international law, you are missing what actually occurred out there. Let me be clear about something that senior naval planners in Pearl Harbor are desperately hoping you will not understand. The USS Rafael Peralta, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer operating as part of the forward deployed naval forces, received direct targeting lock from People's Liberation Army Navy assets for 18 minutes continuous. Not a sweep, not a search radar painting. Active fire control radar maintained on an American warship in international waters for 18 uninterrupted minutes. And the Rafael Peralta did not return fire. It maneuvered defensively and withdrew from the engagement envelope. That happened. Having spent years analyzing naval confrontations in contested maritime environments, having studied every significant incident in the first island chain, going back to the EP-3 collision in 2001, I can tell you with absolute certainty that what occurred in the Taiwan Strait represents a fundamental shift in the operational calculus governing U.S. forward presence in the Western Pacific. The immediate trigger event occurred at 0347 local time when the People's Liberation Army Eastern Theater Command announced via maritime safety broadcast that a 20 nautical mile exclusion zone was being established along the median line of the Taiwan Strait for what Chinese authorities described as routine training exercises. The announcement gave vessels in the area a 4-hour notification window to clear the designated zones. Standard protocol for Chinese military exercises in these waters typically provides 12 to 24 hours advance notification through official channels. The compressed timeline represented the first indicator that something beyond routine operations was developing. The Rafael Peralta, operating approximately 43 nautical miles northeast of the exclusion zone boundary at the time of the announcement, maintained course and speed consistent with freedom of navigation transit protocols. The destroyer had transited southbound through the strait 3 hours earlier without incident, executing what the Navy classifies as innocent passage through international waters. The decision to maintain presence in the general vicinity rather than immediately departing the area reflected standard operating procedure for demonstrating that international waters remain international waters regardless of unilateral declarations by coastal states. What the initial reports did not convey, what the carefully sanitized Pentagon briefing slides deliberately omitted, was the composition of the Chinese naval force establishing that exclusion perimeter. We are not discussing a handful of corvettes and patrol craft conducting a show of force operation. The People's Liberation Army Navy deployed elements from 3 separate destroyer flotillas totaling 11 major surface combatants. This included 2 Type 055 Renhai-class cruisers, the Nanchang and the Lhasa, representing the most advanced surface warfare platforms currently operational in the PLA Navy inventory. These are not coastal defense vessels. These are blue water power projection platforms displacing 13,000 tons fully loaded, equipped with 112-cell vertical launch systems capable of employing the YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missile with a range exceeding 540 kilometers. The commitment of 2 Type 055 platforms to what Chinese authorities characterized as routine exercises represented a signal that anyone with operational experience in naval force composition would immediately recognize as preparation for contested engagement rather than training evolution. Stay with me because what I am about to tell you explains why the Rafael Peralta's commanding officer faced the most difficult tactical decision any peacetime destroyer captain confronts. Supporting the Type 055 cruisers were four Type 052D Luoyang 3 class destroyers, each displacing 7,500 tons and carrying 64 cell VLS systems, and five Type 054A Zhangkai 2 class frigates optimized for anti-submarine warfare and area air defense. This force composition provided layered defensive coverage extending from subsurface threats through high-altitude air defense while maintaining offensive strike capability against surface targets at extended range. The deployment pattern, when analyzed through the operational lens of naval tactics rather than the diplomatic lens of political signaling, revealed an anti-access area denial posture designed to contest control of the strait rather than simply demonstrate presence within it. The technical specifications of the systems involved matter enormously here because they define the engagement geometry that ultimately determined what happened when the Rafael Peralta maintained its position. The Type 055 carries the Type 346B active electronically scanned array radar, a system providing simultaneous tracking of hundreds of targets while directing multiple missile engagements. The system operates in S-band and C-band frequencies with detection ranges against destroyer-sized surface targets exceeding 400 kilometers under optimal atmospheric conditions. More significantly, for understanding what occurred, the Type 346B provides the targeting data for the YJ-18 anti-ship missile, a weapon system that fundamentally alters the calculus of surface warfare in the Western Pacific. The YJ-18 employs a subsonic cruise profile for the majority of its flight, conserving fuel and minimizing radar signature before transitioning to supersonic terminal sprint at Mach 2, 5 to Mach 3 in the final 30 to 40 kilometers of engagement. This profile creates severe challenges for defending ships because the weapon provides minimal warning time between detection of the high-speed terminal phase and impact. The Rafael Peralta's AN-SPY-1D radar would detect the subsonic cruise phase at perhaps 25-30 kilometers given sea state conditions and radar horizon limitations, providing maybe 90 seconds to 2 minutes between detection and the weapon's transition to supersonic sprint. Once the missile accelerates to terminal velocity, the engagement timeline compresses to perhaps 25 to 30 seconds before impact. These are not theoretical calculations. These are the operational realities that destroyer captains and combat systems coordinators train against in workups before deployment. 8 hours after the Chinese exclusion zone declaration, at approximately 1147 local time, the tactical situation evolved from political demonstration to direct military confrontation. The Rafael Peralta, having maintained station 43 nautical miles from the exclusion boundary, began receiving indications through its ANSLQ-32 electronic warfare suite that it was being illuminated by fire control radar rather than search radar. The distinction proves absolutely critical. Search radar sweeps across wide areas identifying potential targets and maintaining general situational awareness. Fire control radar locks onto specific targets, providing the precise tracking data required to guide weapons to impact. When a warship illuminates another warship with fire control radar in peacetime conditions, the action represents internationally recognized precursor to weapons employment. The rules of engagement governing U.S. naval operations authorize commanding officers to treat sustained fire control illumination as hostile act, justifying defensive response up to and including weapons release. The Rafael Peralta's commanding officer faced the decision every destroyer captain hopes never to confront. Return fire control radar lock, which would escalate the confrontation into mutual targeting relationship and increase probability of miscalculation, leading to actual weapons employment. Maneuver defensively to break the targeting lock while maintaining presence in international waters, or withdraw from the engagement envelope entirely, which would represent tactical concession but avoid potential escalation to shooting war. Let me walk you through exactly why this matters in ways that the sanitized briefing you will get from official sources cannot convey. The commanding officer of the Rafael Peralta had approximately 45 seconds from the moment his electronic warfare officer confirmed sustained fire control illumination to decide on response. 45 seconds to assess whether the illumination represented deliberate escalation, individual unit initiative exceeding higher authority guidance, or system malfunction. 45 seconds to calculate whether returning fire control lock would be interpreted by Chinese commanders as defensive posture or offensive preparation. 45 seconds to weigh the tactical humiliation of withdrawing against the strategic catastrophe of initiating the first shots in a great power war over a freedom of navigation transit. The fact that you are not currently reading about a naval engagement in the Taiwan Strait tells you which decision the captain made. The Rafael Peralta maneuvered defensively, increasing speed to 28 knots and altering course to open range from the Chinese Surface Action Group, breaking the fire control lock through geometric displacement rather than electronic jamming or counter-targeting. The destroyer maintained this defensive maneuvering profile for 18 minutes, during which Chinese units repeatedly re-established fire control illumination, requiring successive evasive maneuvers before the Rafael Peralta cleared the effective engagement envelope and the Chinese units ceased active targeting. What happened in those 18 minutes represents a threshold crossing that changes everything about U.S. naval operations in the Western Pacific, regardless of how carefully official statements are calibrated to minimize the significance. For 7 decades, American warships have operated in the waters surrounding China based on the presumption that freedom of navigation transits would be monitored, tracked, and shadowed, but not actively targeted with fire control systems. That presumption no longer holds. The People's Liberation Army Navy demonstrated willingness to maintain weapons-grade targeting on United States warships operating in international waters, accepting the escalation risk inherent in that action, calculating that American commanders would choose tactical withdrawal over potential engagement. And that calculation proved correct. The Rafael Peralta withdrew, not because its commanding officer lacked courage or its crew lacked capability, but because the strategic guidance governing peacetime naval operations provides no good options when a peer competitor decides to treat international waters as contested battle space, where targeting relationships normally reserved for wartime become routine peacetime practice. Keep watching because the next part is where everything starts to unravel beyond the immediate tactical encounter. The Rafael Peralta incident occurred in isolation from supporting assets that would normally provide layered defensive capabilities during high-risk transits. The carrier strike group centered on USS Carl Vinson was operating approximately 380 nautical miles east of Taiwan, well outside the range where carrier air wing assets could provide meaningful support to a surface action developing in the Taiwan Strait. The absence of carrier aviation support during the transit reflects broader force posture decisions driven by the reality that the United States Navy no longer possesses sufficient hulls to maintain continuous carrier presence in every potential crisis zone simultaneously. The service currently operates 11 aircraft carriers, of which typically 3 to 4 are deployed forward at any given time, while others undergo maintenance workup training or provide surge capacity. This force structure proved adequate for managing maritime security in an era when potential adversaries lacked capacity to contest American naval dominance in their own littoral waters. That era has ended. The People's Liberation Army Navy now operates a fleet tonnage exceeding the United States Navy by approximately 30%, with that advantage concentrated in the Western Pacific, where geographic proximity provides inherent operational advantage. The strategic implications extend far beyond a single destroyer's tactical withdrawal from a confrontation in the Taiwan Strait. Every American ally and security partner in the Western Pacific is watching how the United States responds when Chinese forces demonstrate willingness to actively target U.S. warships in international waters. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, and Taiwan itself are making calculations about the reliability of American security commitments based on incidents exactly like this one. If a United States Navy destroyer withdraws when facing fire control illumination from Chinese surface combatants, what does that suggest about American willingness to engage in actual combat operations should China move against Taiwan? The question is not rhetorical. It is the central strategic assessment being conducted in every Allied capital from Tokyo to Canberra right now. The credibility of American extended deterrence rests entirely on the perception that the United States will actually fight if deterrence fails. Every tactical withdrawal, however justified by rules of engagement and however prudent given escalation risks, erodes that perception incrementally until the cumulative effect creates strategic doubt about whether American security guarantees retain meaning. What you need to understand about the broader force structure context is that the Rafael Peralta incident does not represent isolated encounter, but rather one data point in an accelerating pattern of Chinese willingness to contest American naval presence throughout the First Island chain. In the past 14 months, People's Liberation Army Navy units have conducted fire control radar illumination of U.S. warships on at least 4 separate occasions, according to classified incident reports that occasionally surface through congressional testimony or investigative reporting. Each incident follows similar pattern. Chinese units establish exclusion zones or training areas. American units maintain presence in adjacent international waters, exercising freedom of navigation. Chinese forces escalate from monitoring to active targeting. American units maneuver defensively and withdraw. The pattern establishes new normal where international waters become functionally contested waters in which American warships operate at sufferance rather than by right. This represents exactly the outcome that anti-access area denial strategies are designed to achieve. You do not need to sink enemy warships if you can establish conditions where enemy warships choose not to operate in strategically significant waters because the operational risks exceed acceptable thresholds. The next 24 to 72 hours will determine whether the Rafael Peralta incident represents temporary escalation that both sides walk back through diplomatic channels or whether it becomes the new baseline for naval interactions in the Taiwan Strait. If Chinese units continue to employ fire control illumination as standard practice during future U.S. transits, the tactical calculus governing American freedom of navigation operations fundamentally changes. Destroyer captains will face the choice between accepting routine weapons targeting as background condition of operations or ceasing transits entirely because the escalation risk exceeds mission value. Neither option proves strategically acceptable, but both become operationally inevitable if the current pattern continues. The United States cannot credibly maintain that international waters remain international waters if American warships avoid those waters due to hostile targeting by coastal state naval forces. Simultaneously, the United States cannot responsibly risk initiating great power war over freedom of navigation transits that, however legally justified and strategically significant, do not represent vital national interests worth potential nuclear exchange. I need you to understand what this means for the broader security architecture of the Western Pacific. The U.S. military presence in the region rests on 2 foundational pillars: permanent basing in allied countries, primarily Japan and South Korea, and freedom of maneuver in international waters, connecting those bases to potential conflict zones. If Chinese forces can effectively deny freedom of maneuver through anti-access strategies that make routine operations prohibitively risky, the entire forward presence model begins to collapse regardless of how many troops remain stationed in Okinawa or how many aircraft sit on runways in Guam. American forces become isolated on their bases, capable of defending those installations, but unable to project power beyond them because the maritime and air domains between bases and operational areas have become too contested for peacetime transits and too dangerous for anything short of full-scale warfare. This is precisely the strategic outcome that Chinese military modernization has pursued for 2 decades through systematic development of long-range precision strike capabilities, integrated air defense networks, and expanded naval forces optimized for near-seas operations. The People's Liberation Army does not need to defeat the United States military in decisive battle to achieve strategic objectives in the Western Pacific. They need only make U.S. military operations sufficiently costly and risky that American political leadership concludes that maintaining forward presence and defending regional allies requires commitment of blood and treasure disproportionate to interests at stake. Every incident like the Rafael Peralta encounter advances that strategic logic by demonstrating that even routine peacetime operations now carry risks of escalation that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. The Rafael Peralta withdrew. The next destroyer in the same situation might withdraw. Eventually, the transits stop happening because the operational risk exceeds the diplomatic value of demonstrating freedom of navigation in waters where navigation is no longer meaningfully free. What I have not yet told you is where this truly becomes dangerous for global stability beyond the regional security dynamics of the Western Pacific. The Taiwan Strait represents one of 7 critical maritime choke points through which the majority of global trade flows. Approximately 40% of all container shipping passes through waters within 200 nautical miles of Taiwan at some point in typical routing between Northeast Asian manufacturing centers and markets in Southeast Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. If the Taiwan Strait becomes effectively contested waters where commercial shipping faces elevated risks due to potential military confrontation, that shipping reroutes through longer alternative passages, increasing transit times, fuel costs, and insurance premiums. The economic impact cascades through global supply chains already stressed by pandemic disruptions, geopolitical fragmentation, and climate-related shocks. We are not discussing abstract strategic competition. We are discussing the operational viability of the maritime trading system that sustains current levels of global economic integration. The decisions being made right now as we speak in the Pentagon, in Taipei, and Beijing will determine whether the Taiwan Strait remains a functioning international waterway or becomes a contested frontier where routine commercial and military navigation faces prohibitive risks. Those decisions are being made based on assessments of the other side's resolve and capability, assessments informed directly by incidents like the Rafael Peralta encounter. If Chinese strategic planners conclude that American forces will withdraw when confronted with active targeting in peacetime, they gain confidence that the United States will not actually fight over Taiwan in wartime. If American strategic planners conclude that maintaining freedom of navigation requires accepting routine weapons targeting by Chinese forces, the operational value of forward presence degrades until the cost of maintaining that presence exceeds the strategic benefit it provides. Both assessments push toward the same ultimate conclusion: gradual American withdrawal from forward positions in the Western Pacific, not through decisive military defeat, but through accumulated tactical concessions that eventually reach critical mass. This is not just about military tactics or naval operations. This is about the stability of the international order in the most economically vital region of the global system. The Western Pacific contains 60% of global GDP, the world's largest manufacturing centers, the most critical technology supply chains, and 3 nuclear-armed powers with overlapping territorial claims and incompatible strategic objectives. The maritime security framework that has prevented major power war in this region since 1945 rests on American naval dominance, ensuring freedom of navigation and providing extended deterrence to allied states. When that dominance erodes, when American warships withdraw from confrontations with Chinese forces, when freedom of navigation becomes conditional rather than assured, the entire security architecture becomes unstable in ways that create potential for miscalculation, escalation, and ultimately conflict that would make previous world wars look limited by comparison. By the time you watch this, the strategic situation may have already evolved beyond the immediate Rafael Peralta incident. Chinese forces may have conducted additional exclusion zone declarations. American destroyers may have attempted additional transits. The cycle of confrontation and withdrawal may have repeated or broken, escalated, or resolved. What will not change, regardless of immediate developments, is the fundamental reality that a peer competitor now possesses both the capability and the willingness to contest American naval operations in waters the United States has treated as accessible for 7 decades. That reality forces recalculation of every assumption underlying U.S. strategy in the Western Pacific, from the viability of defending Taiwan to the credibility of alliance commitments to the sustainability of forward presence posture. The Rafael Peralta withdrew when confronted with fire control illumination. That tactical decision, however prudent in the moment, carries strategic consequences that will echo for decades in the calculations of allies, adversaries, and the American political leadership trying to navigate between credible deterrence and catastrophic war. The strait remains international waters on the maps. The question is whether it remains international waters in operational reality, or whether we have just witnessed another incremental step toward a new normal where American power no longer reaches the places it once dominated, and the world adjusts accordingly to the reality of contested seas and uncertain commitments.